Welcome to the next video. In this video we're going to discuss something called dynamic arrays, and this will build on the last video. As you can see from the example, this is pretty much the same example that we had last time, just a little tweaked, a little cleaned up. So if you haven't seen that video, definitely check it out. A lot of the concepts are the same. We're just going to go one step deeper into the word dynamic, what that means for arrays. So just a recap from the last video, an array is just one variable that stores a bunch of variables. So for example, in this case we have the array variable called numbers, and it's just an array, a list of numbers, of integers from 0 to 4. So there's 5 of them, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And the way we access them is we say numbers, and then we use the square brackets to say which number we want. So numbers 0 is some number. And before we actually jump into dynamic arrays, let's go over the script real quick, just in case there's something unfamiliar, if you got something, or if you feel confused. So basically, let's start with the variables. So we have 4 different variables. The first is input. That's where we're going to store the user's input. So when a box pops up, it'll ask the user for a number, and we'll store it in here. Then we'll convert that input. See, because it's a string, the user will put in some text, so we have to convert it into an integer. So when we convert into an integer, we'll store it into one of these numbers. So it'll be like numbers, I or 0 equals some number that the user gave us. But instead of 0, it'll be I, because it'll be a loop. We're just going to do it automatically. You'll see when I get there. And finally, solution. We're going to add all these numbers together and store them in solution. And I is for the loop counter. If you've seen the loop videos, you remember that we use a counter to keep track of how many times we've gone through a loop. Okay, so let's get into the body of it. The first loop asks for the user input. And this is almost the same from the last video, except for the one thing that I changed was right here that you might notice. All I did here was I just added a way for the user to know which number he was on. Last time, if you saw the video, we didn't really have a number. It just kept asking for numbers, and the user didn't really know when it was going to end. So in this case, we at least tell the user which number they're on. So whatever number you're on, it uses the loop counter. So the loop counter starts at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to say, number 0. Give us the number 0. But instead of 0, we're going to start from 1. That's the plus 1 part. So if you remember the last video, I said that in programming and scripting, everything starts from 0 and goes up. Well, in real life, everything starts from 1. So usually, to make it more natural for the user, you'll start counting from 1 instead of 0, like you would in programming. So even though we're counting from 0 here, 0 to 4, the user is going to see it as 1 to 5. Okay, and then so we store this, whatever the user gives us an input, we convert it string to int. That converts the string input into a number, and then we stored it into the ith element. So remember how numbers bracket I isn't some number, so it'll go from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I0 will be the first number the user gives us, I1 will be the second number, etc., etc. So we'll store all those 5 numbers in there, and finally we're going to add all the numbers. So once again, we have another loop that's going to go from 0 to 4, and it's going to add the ith number, so the 0th number, the first number, the second number, to the solution. So the solution starts at 0, and it'll be whatever this number is, the 0th number plus the first number, etc., etc. And finally, we'll just print out the solution. And remember, we have to convert it to a string because it's an integer. You can't print out an integer. So let's just run it once just to see that it works. Alright, so number 1 will be, let's see, 3. We'll just keep giving 3s. Or we'll give 1 5. 3. Alright, so this is where we're going to start talking about dynamic arrays. Now, the difference between dynamic arrays and static arrays is that static arrays don't allow you to change the size of this list, of a bunch of variables. You can't change 0 to 4 in here. You can only set it once, and that's it. That's a static array. But with dynamic arrays, you actually don't set a size right away, and then in your script, you can change the size whenever you want, or you can ask for the size. So that's what we're going to do this time. So we're going to have almost the same script, except we're going to ask the user how many numbers he wants to input. So how we're going to do that is we're going to say, first of all, let's get rid of this. And this is the difference between dynamic and static array. So if you want a dynamic array, all you have to do is get rid of the square brackets right here that we had 0 to 4. You don't need those for a dynamic array, because we're going to set the size within here. We're going to set, you know, how many elements there are in this array in the actual script. So you just leave it like that, and now we have to ask the user how many times he wants, how many numbers he wants to use. So what we're going to do is we're going to still use the same variable input, because we can override it later. So we're going to say input read line, and we're going to say how many numbers do you want to add together. Okay, so the user is going to give us some number that he wants, how many numbers he wants to add together. And what we're going to do is we're going to set the size of this array to however many numbers he wants. So what we're going to do is, we're just going to do this, actually you can do this in 2 or 3 steps, but we're going to do it in 1 step just to make it more compact. So what we're going to do is say set array length. This command, it sets the array length of whatever variable you give it. So in this case var r, so that's the array that it wants. And so what we're going to do is going to say numbers, because that's the array we want to set the size of, and count. This is how long do you want it to be. So what we're going to do is set it to string to int input. So right away we're just converting whatever the user gave us, a number, it's a string still, remember. So we have to convert it, and then we set the array numbers to that size, to whatever the user gave us. Okay. And finally, what we have to do is, dynamic arrays always start at 0. So you know how if you had a static array, you could say something like 3, 4, and then you can only use you know, numbers 3 and numbers 4. But with dynamic arrays, you always start at 0. You can't really help that. So it will always start at 0, don't worry about that. But this we have to change, because now the array length is something we don't know what it is. It could be anything, whatever the user gave us. So the way you can do this is say get array length. This will give you the array length of whatever array you give it. So let's say numbers, and we have to do -1, because arrays start at 0. So if you get the array length, let's say you have 3 elements in there. So it's array 0, array 1, array 2. That's 3 elements, right? Well, if you say get array length 3, then scar will go from 0 to 3, but there is no third element, because the size is 3, but it only starts at 0. And the reason we do this is because arrays start at 0 and go until some number. So the size is in like in natural terms. For example, if you have an array of size 3, that means that there are elements number 0, number 1, and number 2. There is no number 3, but the size is 3. So we always have to have a -1, because scar goes from 0 to whatever this number is. And if you say, like if the size is 3 and you say go from 0 to 3, that'll be wrong, because there is no third element. There's no variable of 3. It may be a little confusing, but just understand that you have to have this -1 here whenever you do loops, because the elements start at 0. The count starts at 0. And we also have to change this to the same thing. So let's just change this to the same thing. And let's see if it works. Well, I forgot this. Alright. So how many numbers do you want? Let's say 2, just to make it simple. Alright, number 1, let's make it 4. And number 2, let's make it 5. See? 9. And you can put whatever number you want in here, and it'll be fine, as long as you don't do negative numbers or 0. And actually, if you do 0, it will be fine. It won't ask you. Let's try it. What if we do 0? See, it won't ask you anything. It'll just give you the answer as 0. Well, thanks for watching.